This is Maple and Myrrh, a queer Canadian look at spirituality for those who feel unrooted. These are conversations about the path to remembering who we are. Hey everyone! I'm here with the brave, bold, and brilliant Britt.
Hi guys, I'm here with trans icon, Mr. Terry Westerby. And I'm not a Christian. Like, I have tried to read the Bible, but it's really hard to get through with my particular type of ADHD because it's just like a bunch of thoughts, it feels like, or like sentences with words I can't understand, and I have dyslexia, and it's really difficult to get through. So I was really curious, just kind of based on where we are in society, um, and the way so many people have started to use like Jesus and Christianity as sort of a weapon. I was really curious about like who Jesus was and like what were his actual teachings, because he seemed like he'd be a cool guy, right? Like hanging out with sex workers, was a carpenter, right? Like just like a regular
Total
sort of, right?
rebel.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
when you
What do
say
you know
you're
about
not a
Jesus?
Christian, oh,
Oh, go ahead.
when you say you're not a Christian,
Mm-hmm.
do you mean like you don't go to church and so you don't identify as a Christian, or do you think that you align with Christianity but you can't call yourself one because you don't like check the boxes?
Mm. I don't follow like any religion. And like I've been to a Christian church. I've been to a Catholic church. I think there's beauty in all religions. But like I don't know. I was just like really curious about who Jesus was and like what were his actual teachings, cuz like there's no way what is being used as a weapon against people is the same as like what this individual that changed the world basically, like across like all religions, almost all religions mention him in some way, shape, or form. How can that person and like what people are using him to symbolize now, how can that be the same? So I was really curious to learn more about him and got into some papers and studies on the Gospels, and I would love to tell you about it.
Yeah, I'm curious. We had a friend of mine who grew up in the church, and his dad was a pastor, and he was going to be potentially joining the church. Uh, he was a guest early on in our podcast, and we talked about all the things the Bible never said.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a lot of claims out there, like hell, hell does not exist in the Bible and things like that. So I think it was a really interesting episode, but we didn't talk so specifically about Jesus. So I'm very curious to hear more about all the other things the Bible never said and what Jesus never said.
Here are all the things. Well, I get more into here are the things he did say. So
Mm,
what we think we know about Jesus is often shaped long before we've read anything he is actually said to have taught. And there's probably not one secret version of him that has been hidden for 2,000 years. And it's not really as simple as saying every church and scholar or religious tradition got him completely wrong. It's way more complicated than that. Most of us inherit this version of Jesus before we ever get any of the texts. We hear about him through family or religion, politics, art, right? Like the Last Supper, everyone knows that painting. School, fear, comfort, shame, hope, and sometimes through people who are very confident that Jesus happens to agree with them. I think we
right.
can probably I'll relate to that. Let's not forget about Christmas, because apparently Santa is the original sugar daddy. Before we even get to the Gospels, most of us already have an image of this guy. For some people, Jesus is this gentle and kind person, and for others, he is very judgmental. Some see him as a rebel, some see him as the founder of Christianity, some see him as a private spiritual teacher, and some see him as someone whose name has been used against them. And the
Totally.
hard question underneath all of this is, what can we actually know about what Jesus taught? Um, so There have been so many peer-reviewed studies that get into like the Gospels specifically, and what we can take from all of them. And it was really interesting to go through these. Uh, the Gospels, which are four main biblical accounts of Jesus' life and teachings, are not recordings. They were written after his death and shaped by memory, oral tradition, community, and interpretation. So, biblical scholar Chris Keith writes about this problem in Historical Jesus Research, especially the difficulty of separating Jesus as a figure in history from the way early communities remembered and told stories about him. So because of that, we don't throw the Gospels away. We just read them carefully. If you've never opened a Bible before, one of the first things to understand is that Jesus did not mostly teach by giving neat explanations. He told stories and he asked questions. He gave warnings. He ate with people others avoided, and he challenged religious leaders. He talked about money, power, mercy, hypocrisy, forgiveness, status, and something he called the kingdom of God. A lot of what he said was meant to unsettle people. Scholar Leslie Hardin argues that Jesus' parables were not just a simple moral lesson. They work more like prophetic interruptions. They push listeners to turn, rethink, and respond. The reason why this matters is because many of us were taught to hear parables as cute little stories with tidy meetings, but their original setting, they often did the opposite. They made people uncomfortable. The outsider becomes the moral example. The rich man becomes the warning. The religiously respectable person misses the point, and the person everyone looks down on sees something clearly. And this pattern just shows up over and over. Richard Bachman's work on the parable of the rich man and Lazarus looks at the theme of reversal, where status in life is completely overturned. Mark Proctor's study of the Good Samaritan shows how that story faces the listener to rethink who counts as a neighbor. The love Jesus taught was not vague niceness. It crossed boundaries, it threatened social order, and exposed the differences between looking righteous and actually being merciful. It asked people to see the humility of those they had been trained to dismiss.
I love that.
Right? And when
Yeah.
I think of all of his lesson, the religion, like the person who's publicly religious, they're the ones holding the signs, at Pride, like the anti-gay, right? And then they're the ones that are anti-abortion. They're the ones who are out there using their religion as weapons.
Yeah, it shows that
Um,
like love is through action, and like I believe all of my fellow man is equal to me and I love them equally. There's no hierarchy. And so I'm going to get angry at the things that produce a hierarchy, that oppress my fellow man. And then that's love, like flipping the tables in the church because they're collecting tax money, and
mm-hmm.
things like that. But I think that's also what makes it open for interpretation. Like, oh, I am protesting abortion and queer rights because I love these people, which is really just a judgment. That being able to misconstrue that love is action allows people to kind of take action saying that they love people, but it's really just judgment.
Totally. I can't help but think that if Jesus saw the way his name is sometimes used as a weapon today, he would be completely devastated because none of it is being used in the way he actually taught, from what I can read and figure out. Because the Jesus we find in these teachings sounds honestly like a pretty rad guy. And that's what this episode is about. And I want to be clear where I'm coming from, because I am not approaching this as a Christian or as someone trying to defend a religious position. I'm coming to this as someone who wanted to understand what Jesus may have actually been teaching before all the politics, church history, and centuries of interpretation got layered on top like a cake from Nailed It. I'm just,
It's grotesque.
I was real proud of myself for that. I wanted to know what his message was. Not the Jesus people used to win arguments, not the Jesus made to fit neatly inside modern politics and church culture. I wanted to go back to the teachings themselves and ask what they may have meant before centuries of interpretation were layered on top. So we are
Mm.
also going to look at traditions outside of the standard Bible, including Gnostic texts, because early people did not understand Jesus the same way. Some later writings present him as a revealer of hidden spiritual knowledge. The earlier gospel material usually places him in a very public world of meals, arguments, parables, poverty, and everyday human behavior. Scholar Feem Perkins has written about Gnostic motives in early Christian writings, and that contrast kind of helps us ask where the historical Jesus may end and where later interpretations begin. Because we definitely know, like, I mean, I'm sure we all have a person in their life that kind of puts their tone of the point they want to get across in like a particular thing Jesus said somewhere and just changes the tone of it. I'm sure,
No,
like, you live in
totally.
Chilliwack.
Yeah. I just had a colleague who exited the board early after winning a by-election so that he could go on a whole tirade against the public school board. And on a podcast, he was like, "Oh, I spent my entire summer translating the Bible from the original Hebrew to English, and I thought it'd bring me closer to Jesus, but it didn't." I'm like, "No, no shit." Like, you can't just interpret the Bible and expect that to bring you closer to Jesus. Like, it's not a relationship, So, I mean, that kind of stuff happens all the time when people are like, "I'm here for Jesus," and I'm like, "Okay, well, if he was here, he would actually be on my side. Sorry, bud."
Do you remember those shirts that were like Jesus is my homeboy, and then it was like him like pointing and like
Yeah.
winking?
Those became so ironic. I love it.
Yeah.
Actually, one
Where do
time when
I
I was
get one
in
of
high
those?
school, I'm sure they're still around. When I was in high school, I had a shirt that I loved to wear all the time. It was actually a religious shirt. I still don't really know how it's religious, but it was, and it said "Caution, slippery when wet." So, I think it said "Caution, slippery when blessed." It was just
Oh, that's
weird.
funny.
Yeah.
Dude, I love those. I love those ironic shirts. My grandma bought my grandfather tangent. My grandmother brought my grandfather one that said like FBI on the front, and she was like, "He's gonna love this." And then when she got it home, the back said Federal Booby Inspector.
Oh
she
god.
was so she was so mad.
That's hilarious. Does she not look
It
at the
was
bag?
pretty funny. No. Um okay. Anyways, this episode is for people who've never read the Bible, people who have grown up with it, people who've left the religion, people who've stayed, and people who are trying to find and understand why this figure is still being argued over 2,000 years later. Maybe the most important question here is not whether Jesus agrees with us. Maybe it is whether we have actually listened to what he was actually teaching. So, if we're going to ask what Jesus actually taught, we have to start with an annoying but important question. What are we working with? Jesus did not leave behind a book, nothing he wrote. There isn't some plain stone somewhere that says like final draft carved into it. What we have are texts written after his death by people and communities trying to preserve what they believed mattered about him. So the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, are the main sources most people know, but even they do not tell the story in exactly the same way, which isn't something we should get our knickers in a knot over. It's just how memory works. It's also how oral tradition works. People remembered Jesus and told stories about him, repeated his teachings, shaped them for new communities, and eventually wrote them down. By the time those teachings reached the page, they'd already been carried through grief, worship, argument, persecution, hope, and belief, and the game of telephone, but just like across centuries, right? Biblical scholar Chris Keith, who I mentioned a couple times, writes about this problem in Historical Jesus Research. He argues that we cannot neatly separate the historical Jesus from the way early communities remembered him. The memory is not just noise in the way of real Jesus, it's how part of Jesus was preserved. And that makes things harder, but also a bit more honest, because the choice is not between the Bible is perfectly simple and we can know nothing. There's much more of an interesting place in the middle where we can ask what themes repeat and what teachings show up across different sources. We can ask what kind of teacher Jesus was, and we can ask which ideas seem to fit his first century Jewish world and which ones look more like later Christian interpretation, which is an interesting way a lot of these papers are published, is like from like the later like Christian teachings of it, and then from like a sort of Jewish perspective where it was mixed in with his what he was raised with. we can sort of pay attention to what made people angry, and we can notice who gets centered, who gets challenged, and who seems to miss the point. Because even if we do not have a perfect transcript, we do have patterns, and those patterns tell us something. And if there's one thing I have learned about spiritual awakening, it's that patterns always tell us something.
Yeah, they almost speak
Jesus,
louder over time. The patterns speak louder over time than the words specifically.
yeah, like you're not learning the lesson. Here is the pattern again and again and again and again until you learn that lesson.
Mm.
Jesus was remembered as someone who taught in ways that disrupted people. He used stories that turned expectations upside down, and he challenged wealth, status, religious certainty, and social exclusion. He talked about the kingdom of God as if it was not just a future heaven, but something breaking into ordinary life. So let's start with Mark. It's the shortest gospel. Are you familiar with anything I'm talking about, or are you just kind of learning with me as I speak?
I kind of understand. Like, I've heard of gospels, and I know that like the Gospel of Luke and the Gospel of Matthew, like those are their accounts of what happened,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's why there's some discrepancy because some of them are his apostles, and some of them were later writers who carried on, and so like, and then at some point, somewhere in like or 1800s or something like that, a bunch of people got in a room and were like, okay, let's just keep these gospels and chuck these ones
Yeah.
out because they're not relevant. So I understand that like the Bible has been shaped over time by different people, different interpretations, different versions. But as far as like anything else, can't say I really know much more.
All right. Well, buckle up, Buttercup. It's going to be a long one. Might do it in 2 episodes. We'll see. Okay, so Mark is usually the shortest gospel, and many scholars treat it as the earliest written account of Jesus' life and teachings, and it like makes sense to start there. So the opening is abrupt. A prophet is out in the wilderness calling people to repentance. Crowds are coming to be baptized, and then Jesus appears, the heavens tear open, a voice speaks, and the story pushes forward almost immediately. And there is sort of a restless quality to Mark. Scenes move quickly, crowds gather, conflict starts early, healings happen in public and private, and religious leaders begin watching. The disciples follow, but understanding comes really slowly. One of the first things Jesus says in Mark is that the kingdom of God has come near. And that phrase is going to matter through this whole series because it sits at the center of so much of his teachings. In Mark, though, it is never handed over as a neat definition. It comes through like images of seeds, soil, lamps, harvests, like metaphors. The kingdom is here, but people still miss it. And that is one of Mark's sharpest ideas. Amazement is everywhere in this gospel, but amazement does not always lead to understanding. These crowds are drawn to Jesus. Like that guy's pretty sweet. What's he saying, right? Like he's attracting a lot of
Mm.
people. And the disciples stay really close to him, and religious leaders study him carefully. Still, the meaning of his teachings keeps slipping past people. Power is one of the places where this becomes clearest. People expect power to look like control, status, certainty, and victory, but Mark keeps pulling the meaning somewhere else. Greatness is tied to service. Faith often appears in people who are desperate, interrupted, sick, grieving, or pushed aside, right? Like when you're at the end of your rope, it's just like, God, please help me, right? Like that is where quite often faith was.
Mm.
The people with the strongest religious confidence are not always the one who see the most clearly. And this actually reminds me about everyone I've spoken to has gone through a spiritual awakening. Most of it seems to happen when they're in the greatest time of need. Like my spiritual awakening started like a couple weeks before I was set to be on stand and like testify against my sexual assaulter. Just like this, like, okay, I see it. Like I'm not there. Like there is something. I literally remember looking at, like my sister-in-law when she was selected to be on my jury. She wasn't selected. She was like up for potentially being on the jury, and she made it through like 4 lottery pulls of 1.5 million people to stand in front of my judge and be able to tell me what like the jury was going to be like and what the defense lawyer was going to be like. And it was just like, what are the chances of that? And I literally looked at the sky and I was like, I'm listening, like, okay, you got me. I see it.
Mm.
There's people moving
Yeah,
strings.
that's I know for me, like I try to almost what's the word, like amalgamate it all of my thoughts and experiences into like one. And so when I see things like the Bible confirm
Mm-hmm.
or say that like when you are at a point in your life where you can't control anything, like things are just happening to you, then surrender to the greater plan, the greater things that are happening around you, because you can't control them anyway. And so to think of that as like a God, some sort of divine force, or I like to think of it as like a cosmic karma.
Mm-hmm.
It feels relax. I can relax into the arms of the cosmic karma because I know that no matter what, life is going to continue on.
Mm-hmm.
And when good things happen, like what you described about your sister-in-law and your trial, it's like I'm so grateful to be in this moment where the cosmic karma is like working in my favor. And so
Yeah.
like to me, you could almost replace God with this same kind of concepts and what Jesus is saying here. So that's kind of why I love doing this stuff. It's like, oh, this totally aligns with what I already feel. And um, yeah, maybe that's cherry picking, but whatever.
I mean, they can't cherry pick, but we can.
Yeah.
Um, so Mark makes us uncomfortable in a really useful way. It gives us a Jesus who is difficult to turn into a mascot. His teachings are too strange for that, and the movement is way too tense. The people closest to the story are even still confused by it. So Mark gives us this series its first warning. Being near the words is not the same as understanding them, right? Like you can
Yeah.
say these things, but do you understand what they actually mean? You're missing the point. Um, and if all of that is true for the people inside this story, it might be true for us too. Mark gives us the first portrait: Jesus as urgent, disruptive, and often misunderstood. I mean, he kind of speaked in circles a little bit, right? Like it's if you're not used to hearing people speak in a way that makes you think, if you're used to listening but not hearing, like you've really got to hear what he's saying. Like they're two different things.
Hmm.
Um
It's also hard because it's been translated, so to not hear it
yeah.
in its original and to
Yeah.
know what the meaning might have been. I know that's been like attempted to be interpreted, but
Right. Wouldn't it be funny if he had a horrible vocabulary and there was like no flourishing in any of the words and like somebody just added that?
he's like, "Hey, anyone want some bread?" And turn bread.
Mark gives us the first portrait. Jesus is urgent, disruptive, and often misunderstood. His teaching is tied to the kingdom of God, but that kingdom does not arrive in the way people expect. It shows up through reversal, service, hidden growth, and the kind of power that makes ordinary people look upside down. So Matthew takes the same Jesus tradition we saw in Mark and gives it a different shape. If Mark feels like motion, Matthew feels more like teaching. And this is where Jesus is presented most clearly as an interpreter of Jewish law, a teacher of righteousness, and someone who keeps asking what faithfulness actually looks like when mercy, hypocrisy, judgment, and power are all on the table. Coming out of Mark, it feels like the camera slows down and zooms out, and Matthew gives Jesus way more room to actually speak. This gospel is where many people get the phrases they associate with Jesus, even if they do not know where those phrases come from. The Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount, love your enemies, the Lord's Prayer, do not judge, store up treasures in heaven, and build your house on the rock. Matthew gives us a Jesus who sounds like a teacher standing inside of the Jewish tradition, arguing about what faithfulness actually means. Matthew is not presenting Jesus as someone casually tossing out inspirational advice. The teaching is tied to law, prophets, righteousness, mercy, judgment, hypocrisy, and the kingdom of heaven. One study on Matthew 5:17 argues that Jesus is presented as the one who fulfills what the law and prophets pointed towards, with the kingdom of God or kingdom of heaven sitting at the center of the gospel's teaching world. In Matthew, the phrase kingdom of heaven appears 32 times and is unique to this gospel. That gives us the first key teaching in Matthew. The kingdom of heaven has come near.
What I understand about Matthew and some of the other gospels, I don't know which ones specifically. Helpful, mildly accurate podcast.
Mildly accurate.
Is that he was criticizing some of the early churches that were established, as Christian churches, and so he was going in and noticing that like the people who had power were using it to like have sex with people who were below them, which we know today as rape because it's not
Weird.
consensual.
Is that
Yeah,
something that's still happening in the church, you think?
I think maybe I think I might have heard of that.
Oh, we should probably fix that.
Yeah, I think Jesus would like that.
Yeah.
Matthew for sure. And so he went around and criticized. So that's when you hear about things like, you know, people who sleep with people who are below them, who use their power to basically coerce people into sex. That's sinful. So you will not get access to the kingdom of heaven. He's like, you're a sinner, and you need to fix that. And so a lot of Matthew was about the church not aligning with Jesus's teachings, and so some of those were really misconstrued into what we now know today as the um, homophobia, or sorry, gay people is sin, and
Mm-hmm.
that was actually Matthew criticizing the church, saying like, "Hey, you're using your power to dominate people and have non-consensual sex with them." So um, I found that
Matthew
very
seems like a pretty
interesting.
cool guy too.
Right? Yeah, they're like, "Hey,
Yeah.
don't use your power to hurt people, and you're a church and you're supposed to help people." And so that's kind of what I heard of, understand a lot of Matthew to be about.
It's funny because it's like the opposite of what I know the church for based on the experiences. I've spoken to a lot of people who've been sort of like ostracized from the church about like they're made to feel uncomfortable. And I mean, I don't know personally anyone who's been vocal about being assaulted in that sort of environment, but I mean, look at everything that's going on in the States right now, how they just move people around and ugh.
Yeah, it just says a lot that since the very beginning of church being established, there has been the same problems we see today, thousands of years later, which is that when you have a hierarchy of power, bad people use their power to hurt people below them and exploit that power. And that's been a problem from the very beginning. And I'd be curious to know further in the Gospels, we find that Jesus was very against actual establishment of churches and hierarchy because he spoke against abuse of power, or at least his Gospels did.
I mean, that's why I think this, like, one of these first teachings in Matthew is so important, that the kingdom of heaven has come near, because Jesus is not only talking about where people go after death, he's talking about how, like, to actually arrive there and what you need to do to change your life now to get there. So that's behavior, priorities, and the way people teach each other is changing. So there's the Sermon on the Mount. This is Matthew chapters 5 to 7, and is probably the most concentrated block of Jesus' teaching in the Bible. If someone has never read the Gospels and wants to understand what Jesus taught, this is the first place to go. It begins with a blessing. The poor in spirit, the mourners, the meek, the merciful, the peacemakers, the people hungry for righteousness, the ones persecuted for doing what is right. The blessing does not land first on the impressive, successful, powerful, or publicly religious. It lands on the people who look weak, exposed, grieving, gentle, hungry for justice, or willing to absorb suffering rather than become violent themselves. A 2021 peer-reviewed article on peacemaking in the Sermon on the Mount argues that Matthew's Jesus calls his followers to break cycles of violence with peace moving outward from God to families, neighbors, and finally enemies. And that is one of Matthew's most important teachings. Peacemaking is not passivity. It is a different response to harm. And
Mm,
I thought that was really beautiful.
totally. It reminds me of the podcast we just did about what Franco said was that when you're in conditions, suffering conditions, you choose who you want to be. And in a similar way, Matthew's saying the same thing. Like those who are suffering, when they choose to be a better person, when they choose to be there for someone, they are actively choosing to be more like God-like, I suppose.
Yeah. The sermon keeps pushing that idea. Anger is treated as something that can destroy a person before violence ever even happens, right? Because you're eating yourself on the inside.
Totally.
Um, Reconciliation matters enough that Jesus says to deal with a broken relationship before bringing a gift to the altar. So, like, you
Mm,
can't even talk to me. You can't even talk to me until you go fix
repair.
this. Yeah.
Yeah.
retaliation gets interrupted, and enemy love becomes the standard, not just neighborly love. And that's something like I often find myself associating this idea to what's going on in the US right now. All of these people who are stuck in these algorithm traps on social media, they have Fox News like blasting on repeat in their faces everywhere they go. They're in these echo chambers of propaganda where someone can no longer tell which way is up. And these systems are made for us to fight each other and ignore the actual people pulling those puppet strings. So, what can we do to build these bridges to refocus our aim on what matters in the end? And that is each other. So, how do we have empathy for those who have had their critical thinking skills systematically taken away from them since childhood? And how can we start
Mm-hmm.
helping these people remove their like shit colored glasses? Like there's so many people that just have these shit colored glasses on,
I love
you
that.
know? Right.
Totally. Instead of rose colored glasses where you see everything is nice, you have
Yeah.
shit colored glasses where you just fear absolutely everything, and it causes you to be like a horrendous person, because of course it does. That's human nature. If you're afraid
Yeah.
of things all the time, you're going to act out. Actually, just read
Yeah.
about a study how if rats get shocked, they can process pain better if they bite another rat, and that's tends to be what happens. And so if you think about these people are being shocked rats, they're coming to bite you. Like that's what they're
Yeah.
doing.
What I appreciate is this is where Matthew starts to sound a little bit like your counselor, because love your enemies is not soft. It asks people to stop building their moral world around who deserves care and who does not. It asks for prayer, even for people who persecute you, and it refuses the easy comfort of only loving the people who already love you back. And I thought that was really beautiful.
Preach.
Yeah, it really asks for you to do the actual inner work.
Yeah, yeah.
Matthew's Jesus also teaches a deeper kind of righteousness. That word can sound churchy, but in Matthew, it's practical. It's about how a person lives, what they value, and what happens when there's absolutely no audience, whether your goodness is real or whether it is performative. And this reminds me
Mm.
of this modern study. And I know this is a tangent, but it feels really relevant. The study is called Right Temporoparietal Junction Underlies Avoidance of Moral Transgression in Autism Spectrum Disorder. I can't believe transgression is the word I messed up in that. And I'm really proud of myself for getting temporoparietal.
I love that. I'm
Yeah,
trans,
thanks.
not as in transgender, as in transgression.
Researchers compared autistic participants with non autistic control participants in moral decision making tasks. People were asked to make choices in both public and private settings. In one version, they could take a personal cost to support a good cause, and in another, they could accept personal gain connected to supporting a bad cause. And the autistic participants were much more likely to refuse the money when accepting it meant helping the bad cause. The authors suggest that autistic participants applied a stronger rule against serving a harmful cause, even when personal benefit was on the table. They also connected this pattern to the right temporoparietal junction, a brain region involved in moral and social cognition. And I want to be careful here, because this does not mean autistic people are magically more moral. It does not mean one brain study explains Jesus, and it does not mean morality can be reduced to a scan. It does poke at something interesting, though. A lot of social life teaches people to perform goodness when others are watching, and then negotiate with their values when there is something to gain. Matthew's Jesus seems deeply suspicious of that split.
Totally. Oh my gosh. Yes. Well, it's just this one time. I'm just gonna take this blood money this one time. It's okay. I just really need
Yeah.
new shoes. I deserve new shoes.
Yeah. I got into many a Christmas table argument about this exact idea, but
So what you're saying, Britt, is that autistic people are closer to Jesus naturally.
that's not what I said. And in fact, I clarified that. I clarified that. I just thought it was interesting.
It's super interesting. I wonder if that's related to brain structure or just the fact that as a neurodivergent person, you would have from birth been more sensitive to the systems that oppress us, and you're
That
more
sounds good.
cognizant of the fact that, like,
That one sounds real good.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's how I kind of
Yeah.
see it, because when
Yeah.
you're aware of like this, sure, this money may bring me new shoes, but it's actually going to be worse in the long run, even for me. You kind of are more aware of that, like cosmic karma, as I call it.
Yeah. Matthew's Jesus seems deeply suspicious of this split. Prayer, generosity, prayer, jeez,
Prayer
Mark.
generosity with Jesus Christ.
I'm just an old timey.
Welcome to Maple and Myrrh. I love it.
I'm going to leave that in. Anyways. Prayer, generosity, fasting, mercy, forgiveness, wealth, anger, contempt, enemy love, all of it keeps getting pulled out of public performance and into private truth. So in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus keeps moving the teaching beneath the surface. Murder is not only about the final act. Anger and contempt really matter here. Adultery is not only about behavior, it's about desire and objectification. Prayer is not a public performance. Giving is not a branding exercise, but let's think about rainbow washing here a little bit. Fasting is not supposed to become spiritual theater. Matthew's Jesus has very little patience for righteousness as a costume. And same.
Yeah.
Same. That is a huge part of this gospel. The problem is not religion itself. The problem is using religion to look holy while avoiding mercy, humility, honesty, and repair. So this connects to one of the most important lines in Matthew. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Jesus says this twice in Matthew. So nice, he says it twice. Once he is criticized for eating with tax collectors and sinners, and again during a Sabbath conflict. A study on this phrase notes that Matthew specifically places Hosea's line about mercy and sacrifice on Jesus' lips in Matthew 9 and Matthew 12, which makes mercy a major key for understanding his teachings in this gospel. I also want to clarify, I'm pronouncing any of these biblical names wrong. Deal with it.
Matthew?
No. Hosea, I don't know.
Oh.
Yeah, no.
Joshua?
It's like when I was reading Harry Potter growing up, and like Hermione, like I didn't know how to say, I've never heard Hermione before, so I was just like, when I heard it in the movie, I was like, huh, that's how you say that.
Say it. But you know what? I recently heard that if you don't know how to pronounce words, that means you read a lot.
Disagree. Or you have dyslexia.
Oh, that too. Yeah.
I have dyslexia.
And you read occasionally.
And I can read. It is a skill I possess.
Excellent.
That gives us one of the strongest Matthew takeaways. If religious practice makes people less merciful, it has missed the point. And what I want to focus on here is that what Jesus is saying is to listen to your own moral compass. Do the right thing because it is the right thing to do, not because of what others may think of you when you do it.
And there's not like one universal, like this is the right thing to do in every circumstance. It's like you have to know what your values are and know how to honor yourself and the people around you through respect and love, and choose that actively every time the opportunity comes up, which is hard.
It's super hard, and it's maybe the right thing to do. You can't participate in that particular moment because it would be detrimental to your mental health, or you know what I mean? Like there's so many complexities, but I digress. Matthew also spends a lot of time on judgment, but it's not always in the way people assume. There's judgment for hypocrisy, judgment for exploiting others, judgment for refusing mercy, judgment for looking righteous while producing rotten fruit, judgment for hearing Jesus' words and doing nothing with them. The sermon ends with the image of two houses. One is built on rock and one is built on sand. The difference is not who heard the teaching, both heard it. The difference is who acted on it. Basically, listening and agreement are not enough, but whether that teaching actually becomes visible in one's own life. Matthew's parables keep returning to this. The kingdom is like a seed in different soils, like weeds and wheat growing together, like mustard seed, like yeast hidden in flour, like treasure in a field, like laborers in a vineyard who all receive the same wage, even though some have worked longer than others. Matthew's Jesus keeps messing with what people think they are owed, and this is important because it shows up in forgiveness too. In Matthew 18, Peter asks how many times he has to forgive somebody. Jesus gives an answer that basically blows up the attempt to count, and then comes the parable of the unforgiving servant, when a person receives enormous mercy yet refuses to pass it on. Received mercy has to become practiced mercy. We have all received so much mercy and forgiveness in our lives. And who are we not to repay that to people and give people the benefit of the doubt?
Right. And the human beings are social creatures. We are connected beings. We need each other. And so to like receive all this mercy for your mistakes and then to just be a judgmental prick to everyone else around you, it's like you are actually taking a gift of human kindness and you're just and like you don't, it's like you don't deserve kindness, but like you actually still continue to deserve kindness, but it is immoral to not show mercy upon others when you have seen so much yourself. And moral people, like morality can be debated, but as far as like human to human connection goes, you're not really going to have a lot of people who want to be around you all the time if you take all this grace and you don't give any back.
Or surrounded by the wrong people.
That's probably what hell really is, if you ask me.
Yeah. Matthew does not let people treat forgiveness as a private spiritual feeling while still living by revenge, resentment, and scorekeeping. And then there's money. Matthew's Jesus tells people not to store up treasures on earth. He says a person cannot serve both God and wealth. He warns against anxiety becoming the center of life. Oops. And later, the rich and young man wants eternal life, but his wealth becomes the thing he cannot release. So in Matthew, money is not neutral background noise, but it gives people this false sense of safety. It can become the thing that keeps someone from actually following the teachings they claim to respect. Matthew gets even sharper with religious hypocrisy. In Matthew 23, Jesus is openly confronting scribes and Pharisees in some of the harshest language in the gospel. This section has to be handled really carefully because later Christians have often used passages like this in anti-Jewish ways, which is not what we want to do. Inside Matthew's story, this is not Jesus versus Judaism. Jesus is Jewish. His followers are Jewish. And the leaders he critiques are Jewish. Mm-hmm. This is an argument inside a Jewish world about what faithfulness is supposed to look like. Matthew 23 comes after a series of arguments between Jesus and religious leaders. And by this point, the tension has been building for a long time. This chapter is basically Jesus saying, you can know the law, you can teach the law, you can quote the law, defend the law, but you're still missing the heart of it. Matthew 23 does not begin by saying religious knowledge is worthless. It begins by showing how religious knowledge can become dangerous when it is separated from humility, mercy, and action. The problem is not that these leaders know too much. The problem is that their knowledge has become disconnected from how they treat people. Then Jesus turns to religious status. He criticizes people who make their faith visible for the sake of being admired. They want the best seats. They want the honor in public. They want the titles, and they want to be recognized as important. The teaching underneath this is simple but brutal. Spiritual authority becomes corrupt when it is used to make the self larger. I like to think of us all as just different parts of our spiritual journey. Like some of us have a lot more learning to do, but that is for them. And that is not our place to put ourselves in a higher position just because we may be farther or less far along.
It's kind of like Matthew invented ego centuries before Freud came on the scene.
Ooh, taking shots at Freud.
Well, yeah, like what it sounds to me is Matthew saying, like, if you use your faith and your position in the church to bolster your ego, then you're letting your ego lead and you're not being a true human, letting your values lead.
Yeah, it's not just about people being fake. It's about like what happens when religion becomes a social ladder. And Jesus is going after the kind of holiness that needs an audience. And the center of this chapter is Matthew 23:23, and that's justice, mercy, and faithfulness. Jesus calls these the weightier matters of the law, because Jesus is not saying details never matter. He's saying details become dangerous when they distract from the heart of the teaching. If your religion makes you precise about herbs, but careless with people, something has gone wrong. People come first, no matter who they are or what they have done, even if they critique pineapple on pizza. I'm drawing a line in the sand. Hawaiian pizza is awesome. What if the people most confident they are defending God are the ones standing in the doorway of the kingdom? Which also brings me back to a lot of what we see happening around the world right now, where people use words in the Bible as daggers, right? Like the people that are presenting themselves as like the best examples of the Bible are the ones that are blocking themselves from getting in, right? They're just, it's,
Well, they're the gatekeepers for others. Like if you say, "Oh, the kingdom of heaven is yours if you accept Jesus as your savior," but if you're trans or gay, you're a sinner and you belong in hell. You are now the gatekeeper to Christ and to the kingdom of heaven, and you are actually doing the opposite of what you're supposed to be doing, which is to welcome absolutely everyone, because everyone's worthy of the kingdom of heaven. That's literally what
yeah,
the whole point is.
yeah. And that's like Matthew 25. Like this teaching becomes impossible to keep abstract. In the judgment scene with the sheep and the goats, the dividing line is not religious vocabulary. It's hunger, thirst, welcome, clothing, sickness, prison, and whether people responded with concrete care. There are interpretive debates about who exactly the least of these refers to, but the force of the passage is hard to soften. Matthew's Jesus identifies himself with the people in need, and judgment is tied to whether mercy becomes action. So Matthew gives us a very specific Jesus. He is a teacher who takes anger, contempt, desire, wealth, retaliation, prayer, forgiveness, and hypocrisy seriously. One of the biggest lessons to take here is that give mercy when judgment would be easier, and reconciliation
Hmm.
when resentment feels justified. Give enemy love when ordinary love runs out. Quiet goodness instead of public performance. A warning that wealth can own us. A demand that faith become visible in how people are treated. Matthew is where Jesus becomes hardest to reduce into a slogan because his teachings are way too specific. And next, we're going to get into Luke, which takes some of the same themes but turns a volume up on social reversal, poverty, outsiders, meals, and mercy.
Yeah, I guess it's really hard to say, "Oh no, he didn't mean don't steal," when he literally says, "Don't fucking steal." Like right down, straight
Quote
up. Like you can't
unquote,
argue,
Jesus, don't fucking steal.
right,
Yeah,
homie?
I saw it.
So are we gonna do the rest of this in part two?
Yeah. Okay. So let's wind this down and then we'll bring it back in part 2. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, everyone. So that's part 1 for now. I wasn't sure how long this was going to be, and it's getting a little long. So we'll continue this on in the next episode, and we'll talk to you next week.
Yeah, I'm super excited to hear the rest because you got me hooked, and I'm like, "Oh, I didn't know this, but maybe I'm feeling very Christian. Like I didn't know so many of these things." So thanks for sharing this, and I'm looking forward to seeing the next or hearing the next week.
All right. Love you. Bye.
Love you. Bye. Remember, you don't have to have it all figured out. We sure don't. But you still get to ask the big questions, even the ones that don't have answers.
Thanks for being here with us. This has been Maple and Myrrh. We'll be back soon, or maybe you'll just stumble on the next podcast right when you need to.
If you want to support the podcast, you can find us on Patreon. Bye.